everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Digital Transformation in the Revenue Cycle, Making Sure You Reach Your Goals Without Wasting Money. On behalf of Beckers, I just want to say thank you all so much for joining us today. Before we begin, I just want to walk through a few quick housekeeping instructions. We'll begin today's webinar with a presentation, and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. Today's session is also being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. If at any time you don't see your slides moving or you have trouble with the audio, please try refreshing your browser first, as that may help. Otherwise, you can also submit any technical questions into the Q&A box, as we are also here to help you. And with that, I am so thrilled to introduce today's presenters. First, we have Raymond Roberts, who is the Director of Data Science at VisIQ, where he leads the company's continuing push into advanced analytics in healthcare. Raymond previously served as a staff data scientist with GE Healthcare, leading their self-healing machine initiative. Next, we have Sean Kirby, who is the Senior Vice President of Product Marketing at VisIQ. With over 20 years of experience, Sean has a unique blend of operations experience, product marketing, business development, and strategic planning. He is currently leading exciting initiatives that use AI and machine learning in new ways at VisIQ. And last but not least, we have Rich Waller, who is the CEO and co-founder of VisIQ. Rich has nearly 2 decades of experience in healthcare management consulting and technology development. Rich is a self-described data fanatic and leads a team of 100+ data scientists, data engineers, and visual scientists at VisIQ. So Raymond, Sean, and Rich, thank you so much for being here today. We're so excited to have you. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to Sean to begin the presentation.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie. Welcome, everyone. We're so thrilled to be here today. Again, this is Sean Kirby. And before we get started, just have a couple of housekeeping measures of our own. Want to make sure that we mark your calendars starting next Tuesday, January 19th. We're going to continue on this digital transformation series with 4 30-minute segments starting next Tuesday on our Daily Swoosh. Our Daily Swoosh is a VisIQ webcast every Monday through Thursday at 1 p.m. Central Time. It's just a lot of fun. We have on YouTube channel there and also on Facebook, where we just have a little bit of fun. We share some hard-hitting topics of the day. And again, like we are starting next week, we'll have some individual series coming up. Also on February 11th, mark your calendars for a reserves webinar that we're going to be hosting as well. What we want to do is go out to visiq.com and get all the information on how you can sign up and be a part of both the swoosh and the reserves webinar coming up. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So in our objectives for today, what we want to do is also start with what this digital transformation age is and really what it isn't. And what it isn't is the image that's really largely shaped by pop culture. This isn't about what the movies, the books, the politicians have shown us, that the robots and some Max Headroom-like figure on a TV have everything all figured out, and that we're to fear what may come. Really, what our talk today is going to conclude is that we shouldn't be afraid of these new technologies, but that we have to know what we're getting into to begin with. And that's where we start with the fundamentals. So we're going to go over, in a nice little segment here, we're going to go over the fundamentals to kind of set the stage for what's to come. Okay, and then we're going to show you what to have a plan, or what that plan is to get to that execution. So we're going to go over those risks and roadblocks with a quick review there. And then where I think a lot of us might be is in that build versus buy versus partnership kind of model. So we're going to provide some pros and cons. We're going to give you a nice little streamlined version of how you can make some of those decisions and what goes into that. What are some of those risks and those rewards that come along with those decisions? And then finally, we're going to go into some real-world examples. And what we want to do is just kind of bring that all together and how it's going to share with that organization, your organization, on how to find value to be successful. Okay? So let's start this big picture here, right? $1 trillion is a lot of money, but really what we've actually heard it said that the digital technology and analytics will not replace people. People who leverage digital technology and analytics will replace people who don't. So, it's very obvious here that the numbers are astronomical. Global spending on the digital transformation age is already over $1 trillion, and it's increasing exponentially. Forrester has actually documented that the executives think most of the revenue will be influenced by digital innovation of some sort. And really already, companies are dedicating huge resources in this effort to digitize. We even saw that PricewaterhouseCoopers found that 30% of all the organizations that they surveyed invested almost 15% of their revenues, not the margins, not what was left over, but 15% of their revenues into digital investments. So if the trends are overwhelmingly in favor of digital transformation and we have the data, really what's the catch? So Ray, what are some of the headwinds that are causing some of the headlines that we have over here on the left, to pop off? What's the catch here?
So we like to call that, what's the rub? You've heard the encouraging things of getting into digital technologies and doing digital transformations. But here's the other side of the coin. There's predictions on average of 70% of siloed digital transformations, they ultimately fail. Individuals like analyst Nick Gardner, they've shown that data science failure rates in excess of 85%. Now, for some of you who've already engaged in analytical projects, you probably heard these terms as well, where your analysts and your data scientists, they're spending a great majority of their time doing non-analytical activities. What does that mean? Doing ETL, cleaning the data, looking for the data. And as a result of these hurdles, your outcomes, we're seeing that only about 20% of models and bots actually get deployed. And that's a net result of maybe 4% of the firms that are actually seeing its success from concept to operationalization of deploying machine learning models and other analytical outcomes. So when you have these outcomes that we're seeing across the industry, that leads us to realizing that it really comes down to the digital transformation fundamentals. For consistent outcomes, what does that mean exactly? Here at VisitQuake, when we talk about a digital transformation, what we're talking about is taking your data and really your data processes from transactional to strategic. When we say from transactional to strategic, what we really mean here is things that you're really familiar with right now, where you have siloed data sources and data collection points. Going from that to a centrally owned and managed data solution. Next, you're maybe used to the data and its organization even being messy. While we call them data lakes, my personal joke is very often, they're more like data Mississippi rivers. They're very deep, they're very fast, they're very violent, and you can't really see what's inside it past a couple feet. Going from that structure to a more organized and curated data lake system, basically data about your data. Ad hoc reports, very common for all of us, but moving from that transactional setup where you have a specific business case, so you build a specific solution, taking more generalized, holistic, strategic approaches so that your reporting formats are reusable, repeatable, and most importantly, you can compare and contrast across applications. This gives you a net setup where you're going from transactional things that we totally acknowledge made your life marginally better. You saw the improvement and it allows you to maintain. But going forward to optimization intersections that result in true innovations that really move the needle forward. What you really see here is there's the well-founded encouragement to get into these actions and these activities. But that excitement leads to starting in an improper format where most organizations and most people, they want to jump here. They want to immediately start talking about data science, machine learning models, neural nets, predictive analytics. But in reality, again, with the fundamental approach, You really need to start here. And what you're seeing is recognizing that when you're taking data seriously and really doing a data transformation process, it's really about taking that data lifecycle management approach and being aware of the full environment as you navigate through it to achieve your business aims. By doing that, instead of jumping immediately to the enhancement section of your projects, which you very well can have outcomes, you have more consistent and more controllable outcomes if you start from a planning and design through enable and maintenance with proper governance to see really where you're at and where you're going and build proper steps for how to get there. What we find is that even using, if you take a look at this Gardner survey here, what you find is most organizations are stuck at level 2, what they call a tactical level. And by tactical, what it means is the governance, first off, is not as strong as it needs to be for the management of projects. There's a disconnect between the business side of the house and the analytical side, and even worse, the engineering side as well. So while the 3 houses are on the same team, they're kind of operating as separate nations. This results in each project being treated a la carte. What you want to do is start moving up your analytical maturity past tactical towards focused, being more aware of your projects and as a collection of portfolios, having a stronger governance. Who is the sponsor of this project? What are the requirements of it? As you see, moving forward to strategic, even pervasive, where you start seeing digital twins and self-healing machines. So that is really the delineation line that we're seeing right now. Can your organization conduct the digital transformation to move you past the tactical of focusing on the project? And if you think about what I'm sharing with you, levels 3, 4, and 5, you start focusing more on your personnel, your people. And that's really the real rub here in one sentence. A digital transformation is really a change management project. This is probably more familiar terminology for everyone across the board here. Everyone knows that a change management project, while indeed it has business goals, it's very much about the people and the planning with those people. Once you realize that a digital transformation project is about your personnel, you can then realize that your personnel have to adapt as well with the proper processes, methodologies, and behaviors that are necessary for successful digital transformations and successful digital and analytical projects. Here's the reality, though. Less than 2/3 of organizations surveyed say they actually invest into their employees for the necessary training during digital pursuits. So while you see a lot of interest and a lot of resource allocation towards technology and tools, you're not seeing the same pacing, the same positive correlation with investing into your personnel. And that's not just your engineering side, also your business side of the house, investing into your business leaders to increase their maturity of understanding and managing data and analytics projects. So what we've seen here at VisEquate is while we separate into 2 buckets of these risk and roadblocks, on the left, these are usually the more well-known. We're not really shedding new light with you by bringing these answers here. You've heard it before. The data quality is not there, or the data's not available, which if the data's not available and the project started, kind of leads into number 2, a poor communication, where you started a project, but you didn't have the resources there. Poor project management. These are things that you've probably heard before. If not, you said yourself. What we find the lesser known items, if you don't have a fundamental structure of how you engage, you'll find that failure to understand the real business problem. What for your client, what is that question that you're answering, or what is that solution you're truly bringing? How are you making their life easier? We also find a misapplication of analytical tools. A lot of times vendors can get so excited about presenting their tool, the conversation leads away from the purpose and the tool becomes an end in and of itself. That can really lead a team astray. Also, lack of empathy. Again, if you're not actively aware that a digital transformation is about people, you can have an outcome where, for example, you have a room of business leaders making planning for data science or data engineering without any representation in the room for data science or data engineers. These kinds of lackings of empathy can also greatly hinder projects before they even start. Naturally, one outcome is unrealistic expectations. I mean, it might make sense that if you're planning what you're going to do with data science and none of the data scientists are in the room, that could result in you having some big rainbow dreams when in reality they need to be garnered a little bit more. And the final one that's not actively articulated that often is the fact that change is disruptive. Once you acknowledge this is a change management project, from there you're really realizing that this is not going to be comfortable, okay? When I say it's not going to be comfortable, your best teams are not perfect teams. Your best teams, in my opinion, are teams that conflict well. So go in knowing, okay, we're going to change, we're going to learn some things. In order to learn new things, we probably have to abandon or, as they say, forget old things. And we want to remember that it's people first. So also while you're doing your digital transformation, actively remain aware of having conflict in a positive way is a great part to having a team. So with that, with those risks and roadblocks, I kind of like to turn it over to what next?
Yeah, and one of the most important decisions to make in the overall digital transformation journey, and even at a project-by-project level, is whether to build, buy, or partner. And I think this is an area that, you know, really, in order to do it properly and iterate properly, it really, in our experience, needs a framework or a decision hierarchy in order to really get to kind of a repeatable model that leads you down the right path. So one of the tools that we wanted to leave with you today is one that we found very successful in assessing this build, buy, partner framework. And it really starts with a few main questions, right? And so, you know, first and foremost, obviously, it comes to have we determined the project feasibility? Have we done a pilot, or maybe is it based on a specific set of research? Obviously, assuming that that is the case, is the required data available? We are going to get into a little bit more detail on how to assess data readiness here shortly. But data is obviously paramount, especially if you're doing anything with machine learning or things that require specific or even, you know, kind of the next phase here, unique access to data. Just because the current data doesn't exist today, there's often things that can be explored in how do we generate data as part of our business model. So maybe through an application or through engagements that we can start to trap unique and specific data, or it could be acquired through a third party. So each of those things as we move through this can be really important to assess kind of, are we data ready? Do we have access to it? Which really leads us to one of the most important points in this framework is this initiative strategic, or does it lead to a competitive advantage? This is really an important point that really kind of breaks the decision tree into important areas to follow. So obviously, if something is not strategic, or it's something that, you know, is really focused on something operational or just improvement, it's almost always the case that buying or partnering can be a lot faster way to achieve success, and also at a better cost. There's been a ton of R&D in the market around these solutions, and so a lot of times an off-the-shelf solution or a partnership model can be very effective in cases that aren't specifically strategic or lead to competitive advantage. If it is a strategic initiative, or we do feel that there's a large competitive advantage, the next step is really that assessment of technical capabilities in-house. And this is, you know, this is really an interesting area, right? I mean, with the global shortage in talent for technology development, it's a challenge for many organizations to build and especially retain in-house teams to be able to really drive these initiatives. And so, you know, in that case, a partnership model can be a great option, right? And if your concerns are around IP or other concerns, they can obviously be addressed through contract structure and choosing the right partner through this. And so, you know, this is meant to be a tool that obviously we'll be providing access to these slides in this deck, but it's something that, we highly recommend asking these questions honestly on each project. And a lot of times you may agree or kind of set on a specific type of structure for the overall digital transformation, but then asking these questions on a project-by-project basis can really help to be a guide to minimize risk and really increase the chances of hitting the project's ROI goals. And so as we go a bit deeper and kind of laying out the necessary components and advantages in a matrix can also be valuable to kind of look at each of these areas. And, in doing that, Sean's going to jump in and talk a little bit about the build aspect of this kind of build by partner matrix approach.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. Focusing in on that, the build side, it's a lot more colorful than the other areas, and part of that is the reason is it comes with some risk. The ultimate goal here, and if we look back at that prior slide, if we answer yes, 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 yes down the line, we say, hey, let's build this thing, and we all have the assumptions that I could do that. I have the technical chops to build something like this, because ultimately we want to get to that third line there, which is control. We want to control our outcomes because there's a higher reward at the end of the project. But along with that comes some risk. All these things that are in red, whether it's talent acquisition or retention, really, because here we are in the healthcare industry. Our primary concern and our mandate is patient care and delivering care and doing that effectively and effectively. It's not necessarily in building the biggest, baddest robot or the biggest, baddest artificial intelligence suite. That's not our core competency. So if we go down that line and we look at some of the other risks around R&D and keeping up with leading practices in this pathway and our time to value, we can struggle with the fact that in our minds, it's a very finite end goal, right? We're going to initiate in data transformation, and we're going to get this all done in the next 12 months or a year, or 2 years, what have you. That's a very finite thinking. But if we take a more humble approach and look at this from a bigger perspective, you're not going to wake up one day and say, I have digitally transformed my organization. It's a constantly evolving project. So you're going to have to be patient along the way. And with that, you're going to have to assume some risk and maybe even giving up some of that control to have a more successful long-term approach. So Ray, maybe we can jump in, and it's a little less colorful, but the buy scenario is one that a lot of our viewers and our listeners are probably more akin to. So what do we have with this?
Absolutely. So with the buy, it may seem less colorful, but excitement is not always what you want, especially in business. We like continuity. We like reliability, dependability. So what you find with buy, while you're not going to hit it out the park maybe by buying a product, because if you think about it from the vendor's point of view, buying a product, they're trying to sell that to numerous possible clients. So usually such generalized solutions maybe, if you're lucky, take care of you at the 80% level. But that's usually on the more successful end. So what you see here is a lot of light green through the buy to where you have mitigated the risk associated of research and development, but you can sometimes find yourself with vendor capture to where due to their setup that wasn't designed for you specifically, you have business cases that you actually have to go outside of what you bought to utilize, kind of working against it. I also want to point out with control, it's really in the perception of the individual or the role you're speaking of. So you can be looking at the same type of business case, and the definition of control might be different from the manager making the decision, or the data engineer who has to maintain it, or the data scientist who has to build and operationalize. So even when you're looking at one specific case, your team is very diverse, and you have to find a way to balance those different definitions of control. Because I can tell you, and you're probably hearing my bias as a data science director, while there may be quote unquote more control with the build, what you lose is the reliance on a wiki You know, being able to go out into the community and ask them when you have a problem how to move forward with your custom solution. So there's always a cost to every decision here.
And moving into moving into the partnership aspect, obviously, you know, when you look at this, it would seem that maybe it's weighted towards this last column here, and really that's not the intention. I think what the partnership option allows, which when you're thinking about mitigating risk and overall success, is the largest degree of flexibility. And that a big point, especially within healthcare technology, it's choosing partners with very specific skills and experience to augment your internal team. And so with the revenue cycle, care management, population risk, digital health, these can be very complex domains, as we all know. And domain knowledge coupled with technical expertise is crucial and can really be tough to build and retain in-house. And frankly, build within a timely manner is one of the biggest challenges. And so, you know, with a partnership approach, it can allow you to build and configure rapidly while kind of maintaining flexibility of leveraging a partner for scale, for training, development processes, infrastructure, and a number of those kind of blended things of combining the build, buy approach in one. And so, you know, as we explore that, what often happens is it leads to the best strategy often being a hybrid approach. And when you think about these things, it really kind of comes down to taking advantage of the tidal wave of current innovation. As Sean mentioned in the earlier slides, there's billions and billions of dollars of investment going into building solutions and creating service companies that are constantly doing these types of technology developments and service offerings every single day to go to market quickly, to understand where there's strength and where there's opportunity, but also in parallel, building in-house capabilities over time. And often a focus on idea pipelines, product management, and critical build resources can be fantastic investments and differentiators for organizations, especially as they leverage the unique capabilities in-house and also kind of plugging into a partner ecosystem can be really often the best solution for flexibility as initiatives change and project timelines move forward. And so with this, what we want to do now is get into kind of a really focused example where we bring some case studies to life from actual VisitQuake clients and go into sort of the high-level building blocks and phases of an actual digital transformation and how we look at it at VisitQuake and from what we've seen with some of our partnerships, you know, within the industry, and bring some of that to life for you and actually kind of, like I said, weave in some real-world experience, some ROI case studies into the mix here. I think I'm going to pass this to Ray on this one.
Apologies, I was talking. Okay, so here at VisitQuake, with the digital transformation, we have it broken up into 3 phases when applying it directly to revenue cycle management. So our first one here is what we call the data management, where you lay the foundation. Conceptually, what that means is, let's get everyone speaking the same language and everyone speaking and thus having the same culture before we dive into a project. Too often when we specialize in industries, we may trick ourselves into thinking that everybody's thinking about the same thing the same way. Even in revenue cycle management, you could have someone whose job, for example, they're incentivized based on how many accounts they scrub, meaning you can order them by the order of the amount of the account, but they're incentivized by how many accounts they go through. So they might just pick the fastest ones to clean versus there's someone else in the business who's like, we do want to focus on these high dollar accounts. Laying the foundation when we say data managers, let's get on the same page here. While we both matter, how do we as a team move forward big picture while we had those individual structures. Internal efficiency there, once we've agreed on those things like what are we, what is our culture, how do we actually take action? What are those parts of the process that maybe we can streamline or make automated? By combining those two, we finally get to where, again, the green part that everybody likes to jump to, the data science and analytics, that customer-facing value, where from there we just optimize. Now, these three items together, they have a target here. And that's what we call here at VisEquate the peak business health target, right there in the center, where with revenue management, we care about the velocity, we care about the yield, and understandably, we care about the cost. You have to optimize and balance these three concerns and where they overlap to achieve the most efficient and ultimately achieve your fiduciary responsibility to the organization to make the decisions necessary, both at the tactical level, working an individual account, but also at that strategic management level of how to lead and guide. So with that, we're going to start here with taking action, again, laying the foundation. And as you heard me say earlier before, what we're really talking about is starting out with the language to build that data-driven culture. First thing you want to do is democratize the planning process as much as possible. The more people who know what's going on, the better. It's very often, you will ask people when we first come in, why do they do the things they do with their processes and methodologies? And more often than not, the answer is, I don't know, or that's how we've always done it. You want to democratize your strategic ideals, and moving forward, you actually want to evaluate the impact of those existing strategies. Because just because a person is not aware of why does not mean it has value, but you want to hold yourselves accountable to why are we doing these things and what is their actual outcome and impacts. From there, you're able to understand what attributes actually lead to success and the success that you defined and what gets you on your target. That is really the big picture when we say a data-driven culture.
And so moving into one of the most critical phases of this, as we mentioned in the beginning, is data readiness. When you're using technologies like machine learning and AI, success is often very dependent on the availability of key data and key data elements. And so actually addressing a question from the audience that just popped up, how far in the digital transformation project do you go before declaring a failure and revising your approach? In our approach and opinion, it should be very early, right? So even within how we structure the data readiness and foundational phases, we like to put go, no-go checkpoints early and often, even within the first few weeks as we go through these assessments. So when we think about use case exploration, data deep dives, data modeling and project scoping, each of these phases have critical go, no-go checkpoints, and we even we would recommend contractualizing those with your partners, with your teams, so that there's really a focus on making sure that those kind of overall metrics are met and challenged to move on to the next phase. And as we do that, we move into setting a strong analytics methodology. So at VisEquate, we really like the summary, trend, benchmark, explore framework. It's really to deliver the right insights to a large variety of stakeholders at the right time. And so this is obviously very high level, but where we focus on kind of that foundational analytics methodology in a transformation. And so bringing this to life in a real client use case, we start many times with a very specific pain point. So in this case, we started with a client, a large multi-regional health system, and looked at denials management as an initial focus, right? And so still pretty big area, but we started out with that, that overall analytical framework for summary, dashboards, trending, benchmarking, and an exploration framework, which, really gave them that foundation in the 360-degree view from the front end for denial prevention, the middle, the back end of the revenue cycle at the most granular level to help them understand and identify problems in payer behavior, as well as understand their internal processes a bit better. And so the next phase is moving more into taking this data and injecting it into workflow and creating action.
From there, once you take your action, we're back to where we talked about earlier, that internal efficiency. And what does that mean? Pat, getting a little bit deeper into the top level there. What we're saying here is you have your processes, you have your behaviors. What parts of it can we streamline? So just to put some quick thoughts into your head, think about taking in a new employee and training them up. How long does it take to get a new person trained up to work files? I'll ask another way. How many people does it take to train them up? A lot of those operations and behaviors, they can actually be embedded into the data. We can curate and structure the data to help a person's learning curve accelerate to where your personnel are able to work more efficiently and work more files ultimately. So, when you're taking it from that point of view, here's some examples. Taking your familiar practices and applying it towards, again, what can be automated? What are the things that even you may think are not repeatable, or you may think are too complex even though they're repeatable? Let's engage that and have some real conversations about it. So your emails, your chats, your reports, a lot of that can be rethought of and remade to become actionable insights, meaning alerting you what you need to focus on as the human level, intelligent work listing, and even performance monitoring. With these different approaches on the internal efficiency, let the machines do the repeatable part so that you, the most important part of the equation, the human being, can focus on the things that the machines can't do, that decision-making, that inductive reasoning, that counterfactual analysis. That is really what we mean when we say internal efficiency. Taking things that maybe in prior terms, they were more qualitative, finding what can be quantified, applying metrics to it, and building automated solutions to assist you in making better decisions more consistently, faster.
And bringing this back to the real case study is, one of the first things that we try to do is start to create real-time or right-time, in this case, alerting, right? So whether it's real-time or whether it's batched, it all depends on availability of data and the use case. But we want fast insights and feedback loops into what's happening with the data that drives action, first and foremost, just by alerting to where there could be potential issues so that they can be addressed. And as we move to the next phase of this, we really want to get into data-driven workflow. And the methodology, this type of methodology can provide large improvements in productivity, in quality, and cost reduction. And so smart segmentation, simple task automation, aligned properly, there can be just significant reductions for touches and work on low priority items. And in this case, the client started focused on denial follow-up and then quickly expanded into other areas of account follow-up with this methodology of really just kind of foundational streamlining, making sure that accounts with the highest probability for liquidity are bubbled to the top, and those with lower probability are to the bottom. That alone creates significant ROIs, which we'll talk about in actually quantify those in just a moment here.
So finally, we're at the end of our digital transformation process with the user value, that customer-facing value, that with the idea of continually iterating and optimizing. And, where we get down to the brass tacks of how are we making money, how fast are we making it, and where are we saving and supporting the institution or the organization that we're leveraging this towards.
So as we get into the, like we call it, Ray talked about in the beginning, kind of the fun stuff, right, where we all want to jump into the robotic process automation, or like we would like to call it at VisiQuade, intelligent process automation when it's data-driven. We recommend following a fairly structured software development lifecycle with internally or with your partners that follows a similar flow. And really the first couple of stages of this are really around understanding the business case and a process deep dive. The difference between digital transformation and digitization, like we like to say, is, we're looking to actually transform processes with technology. We're not just looking to, create a digital version of the existing process that could be broken or could be inefficient. We want to transform it, right? So in all of our initial phases, we're kind of litmus testing, making sure that's what we're doing. And once we get that process definition document, we move into that build, test, go live, and maintenance phases. And obviously the building and testing is pretty self-explanatory once you have a clear process definition. And then with maintenance, there was actually a question on this. How do you avoid issues with maintenance or kind of miscalculating the maintenance responsibilities? It's a great question, especially with bots and this type of technology. There's often, a time where you really have to look at the maintenance, really have to scope it, make sure you're budgeting, because, bots and these types of automation technologies, whether they're via APIs or bots, they do break. They do have maintenance required. And so it's important to go into that with that expectation clearly defined and eyes wide open about what that budget, people, process, technology needs to be in order to have a really effective maintenance cycle. So now let's get into some of the actual hard ROI of this case study and this example. With this client, when we focused on setting the analytical foundation, we found some really significant ROI. And really what this came down to was having that 360-degree view into the data allowed our client to yield over $100 million or $113 million in net cash lift focused around the pre-build denial unit that allows from a denial prevention, putting scanners on the front end and the back end of the process, was able to close a very significant system gap and process gap with this solution and having that foundational insight, as well as 8.3 million in denial recoveries. Just having that, a really real-time kind of lens on what was happening from a follow-up perspective where things maybe did slip through a process or two once things got in place. So kind of having that front-end and back-end view and those real-time alerts was a really big win for this client. And as we moved into the productivity side of it or the workflow side of it, similarly, we were able to, by creating, smart segmentation, prioritizing accounts with the highest potential liquidity, a 50% improvement in denial overturns in cash and 11.4% in count, which is interesting, right? Because, you have that large improvement and maybe a less improvement on count, but when you're prioritizing the most important work, you see that kind of outsized gain in dollars, which is really cool. And as we looked at, as this client expanded past denials and into other areas, we're seeing over 100% and 104% overall throughput improvement, and they did all of this while actually reducing their staff by 15%. So if we go back to that yield, velocity, and cost goal, we really are keeping that in mind as we're looking at the types of ROI we're trying to achieve and focusing on these areas. And so moving into the automation phase after kind of the core workflow piece, we're really looking at productivity, quality, and portability. And productivity, obviously, with bots, you can get a lot more volume of work. With narrow use cases, we've seen, as you can see, 10x type results. Again, we want to go very narrow. We want to go very focused. And when our clients have done this with us and other partners, that's really been the recipe for success versus boiling the ocean. And quality, right? Bots do the same exact thing every time very consistently. So it takes out some of that manual error. It is something that we're really looking for. And then portability. Many times when you're creating bots, where we've seen success is creating kind of a modular approach where things that can be repeated across processes are not recoded or rebuilt. They're actually shared across other teams and other initiatives so that you have a kind of a growing economies of scale as you build more and more bots.
Great stuff there, Rich. And as we conclude the conversation here, we'll talk about where we're going. But I want to thank for all those people who are providing some questions in there. We're going to get to as many as we possibly can here at the end of the presentation. So if you have some more, please feel free to put those in the Q&A section. So let's move into this final little segment here on where things are going. The goal, as we talked about throughout this presentation, is to bring about initiatives that result in solid value. As Rich just indicated, we want to see that at each stage of the game. So you don't have to wait until the final tally is done to add up all the value that you've created. It starts in the planning process. It starts at each of those different steps along the way. And as Ray talked early on in the presentation, ultimately this is a change management initiative. We have to get rid of those prior expectations, the biases that have kind of clouded our vision, or actually just narrowed our vision of what rev cycle is. If we look at just, and even recently, just looking at what robots can do, it's talking about the mundane kind of things. We need to even break away from those shackles and look at the big picture. What can technology do to provide us an enormous value down the line? So of the 5 things that are on here, and they're all super important in creating that digital value, the one I really want to focus in on is that culture is greater than the strategy that you put forward. So what I mean by that is that nothing can move forward unless it's part and parcel of who the company is. What are those foundational values? What do you reward? Do you reward risk? The last one there. And does the executive team have the muscle to make things happen? You got to remember that this isn't just an empty chair mandate. We talked early on that this is not a project that has a finish line. It's not, you can use that euphemism, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Well, it's not even a marathon because there's no goal line. You're not going to wake up at the end of the project and say, oh yeah, I've digitally transformed and I've done everything there's possibly to do. It's going to change, it's going to iterate, it's going to be open-ended, constantly varied, and you're going to be continually challenged along that path. So you're going to have to adjust that mindset to take you on that journey, and not the marathon, but the full journey that's going to fundamentally change the way you do business. So you'll wake up one day and it's like, wow, what just happened? We have completely changed the way we've done our business and how we approach it, how we value things, and how we gain value out of it. Okay. So last thing that we want to share here is that these technologies, will these technologies outright replace the humans? Or will they just augment and work alongside them? Are we in this age of with, really? Where the humans are maximizing the technology that's maximizing the humans. And really the answer to that affects the whole strategy. And for the executives, it's going to include the hiring and the managing of that talent. And for everybody, it's going to be, you have to understand that the AI and all of the technology can do many things better and faster than the human counterparts, but it can't do everything. So the last thing I want to leave you with here is that the goal is to identify which are which, so that the humans really can apply their unique energy and intelligence to upsource and upscale themselves in the right direction. So with that, I just want to reiterate, that's the end of the presentation here, but just want to make sure that there's something that you found, a little nugget here that caught your attention. Ray and Rich are going to continue on this series starting next Tuesday on the Daily Swoosh. And be sure to sign up for the Reserves webinar coming up on February 11th. And for all that information, go to VisIQuate.com and you find everything you need to sign up to be a part of the community that we're building there. And we'd love your feedback as well. So with that, I think we'll go back to Mackenzie and talk about some of the questions that we have.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much to Sean, Raymond, and Rich. This has been such an insightful, interesting presentation, so appreciate you sharing your thoughts there. We'll now kick off the Q&A session. Like Sean mentioned, if there are any audience members who still have questions for our presenters, please feel free to submit them now by typing them into the Q&A chat box on your webinar console. Otherwise, we will dive on in. The first question is from an audience member who's asking, what do you think are the top 3 impact areas of digital transformation in healthcare?
I'll take that. So, what the areas, this is Rich, at VisIQuate, we're focused really intently on the hundreds of billions of dollars of administrative waste that are going on within the revenue cycle and similar processes. So, we're very focused. We think that these are huge opportunities. There's certainly a ton of other opportunities within the clinical space and others that, I think are certainly ripe as well. But our focus right now is, in areas like overall denial prevention, denial follow-up, as well as, kind of working more effectively with payers and, the patient responsibility aspect of things as well, and the patient financial experience overall are areas that we're very excited about applying digital transformation.
Perfect. Appreciate you weighing in there, Rich. Thank you. The next question is, what are the criteria you use to perform smart segmentation on work processes to identify the processes that are ripe for automation?
Sounds like a data science question, Ray.
Yeah, I can take that one. So really the criteria, so this is really the approach. We start with the subject matter experts. Again, start with the people. And we ask, hypothesis. What are the parts that you hypothesize have an impact? And specifically, what do you think they have an impact on? That's really where you begin. Get those two sets together. You combine that with asking the business as a whole, what are those things that the business cares about? Now, that might sound very generic, but it's really not. While digital transformations, I think right now they're saying we're in the 4th industrial revolution. While that's all new, business is not new. We've been doing it for hundreds of years. At the end of the day, there's only so many things that a business can optimize and improve. So we find out what you care about and put it in these boxes, then connect it to those hypotheses. So really what you want is to build your platform and your data in such a way it doesn't take you 2 years to answer the question. That's really where we kind of win more consistently. It's not about claiming that we're smarter. It's about that our platform, the way it's structured, you can ask more questions and get more answers sooner to get you more aligned with what's real and what's not. So that's so to tie it all up again there, really what you're starting with is, so let's start with what you think affects, and let's find out if it's actually true, and let's not take too much time finding out the answer.
Absolutely. Appreciate you weighing in there, Ray. Thank you. This next audience member is asking, how do leaders decide which projects will be prioritized?
I can take that one, Mackenzie. I think the first thing we need to do is go back to what Richard said earlier and focusing on the small piece first. We don't want to boil the ocean, so we want to start with projects that are going to have the highest amount of impact on the organization with the lowest amount of effort. Because what we're able to do is basically pay forward all of the investment that you may have up front for all those future projects. You want to win early so you can gain some momentum, and that it'll depend on what the situation is at your particular shop. So doing an assessment of the current available technologies, the current resources there, where the performance is going to really hone in on that area that's going to have the biggest impact up front. But I strongly urge and really encourage our audience to focus on those things that you can pay forward. Don't try and solve the world's problems all at once. Start small and then iterate and then gain some momentum, gain some wins, and then you're going to be ultimately more successful.
Well said. Appreciate that response. We have another audience member here who is asking, they're saying, it sounds like data is key to driving much of these capabilities around digital transformation. How does your technology or platform ensure interoperability and integration to various client systems or architecture?
I would say for interoperability, it's really two things. First, the actual structure of the data. So for example, you can absolutely put your data in YAML files, for example, but it's very verbose, it slows down your systems, it ends up costing you a lot more money. If you're wanting to be in a cloud environment, you're going to want to lean heavily towards files of a JSON structure, for example, or an Avro. So first, the structuring of the data. Secondly, you want the data not structured for people who are familiar with it. You kind of want to take the time up front to structure it, and you've probably heard it termed as metadata or reference data. You want to invest that time up front because it pays off dividends moving down the line. Again, most of your time is spent people trying to understand the data because either the data about the data is non-existent or it was made by experts for experts. Again, democratization is where you're going to really see your returns as things accelerate in this environment.
And I think to augment that, Ray, great technical answer. The other aspect of this is it's actually just hard work, right? I mean, we like to describe, getting into healthcare data and interoperability almost like kind of crawling into the manhole, right? You have to get down there, you have to roll up your sleeves. And it's something that, as you look at evaluating partners, it's important to make sure that they're not oversimplifying this aspect of healthcare data interoperability, the data cleansing, the data availability. As we all know that are in healthcare, this takes quite a number of years of experience and iteration and kind of having the battle scars to really understand how to do this quickly and accurately.
Yeah, that's a great point. It makes me think about the fact of it's like a technical debt snowball. It is hard work, but if you take care of it early on, it doesn't become a greater problem further down the line when you're trying to operationalize or build models with it. So absolutely.
Wonderful.
One little thing to add on to that is one of the first slides that we shared was the failure rate of projects. And for those who tried to oversimplify it, or if an organization says, hey, there's no problem in the world, we've never had a problem with implementations, or everything is super simple, you'll see that value tomorrow. Be very wary of that, because that's where those false expectations are set, and that's why a lot of those projects have failed. So find that vendor, that partner that's going to come alongside you and be truthful and mindful and kind of lay out the whole process for you.
Yeah, I think that's all really helpful for our audience to know. So it looks like we have about 3 minutes left and time for probably one more question. This one is, how do you quantify business value from digital transformation?
So,
yeah, great.
I know I'm probably
So
with that one, with quantifying the business value from a digital transformation, again, it starts with what does the business care about. Too often we get into the weeds of what you're actually building, then after the fact you're trying to align it to objectives. So my answer would be start with what are those optimization values? Are you looking to acquire more clients? Is it solely revenue? Is it a mixture of the two? Based on that, we can have an objective analysis of the activities that we're doing. So the first thing is quantify your optimization goals, whether it's client acquisition, employee retention. That's a very important facet of businesses like this. Keeping employees, keeping knowledge inside, and then from there, diving into the more technical side.
Wonderful. Well, Raymond, Sean, Rich, I just want to thank you all again for such a great presentation, your time today, and thank you to VisitQuate for sponsoring today's webinar. To learn more about the content that was presented today, please feel free to check out the resources section on your webinar console and fill out the post-webinar survey. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a great rest of their afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us.